Section 4, Societies in Medieval Africa. What factors influence the development of societies in Africa? By the end of the section, identify different ways family influenced medieval African cultures, the variety of forms of medieval African governments, and the role religion and art played in medieval African societies. So key terms, people, places, nuclear family, patrilineal, matrilineal, lineage, consensus, complex, we see that word again, and griots. So if we look at family patterns, so nuclear family are parents and children. Extended family would be the nuclear family plus more, grandparents, cousins, aunts, uncles. And so if we look at Africa, Africa tends to have extended families. And if we look at kinship, patrilineal is when property is inherited through the father's side. Matrilineal is when you trace things and property follows through the mother's side. And so in Africa, you see both of those taking place. Not that it's quite equal, it tends to be a little bit more patrilineal, but there's also a number of cultures who are matrilineal. And we see that in Native Americans as well. So for example, on the East Coast, the Iroquois, they followed things through the matrilineal line. And so when individuals would get married, husbands would move into the wife's family's lodges. So it's not unique to Africa. And especially when you have, like, for example, with Africa and Native Americans, that north-south, like we talked about, leads to a greater degree of variety. And so you get more different kinds of ways of doing things. And the other thing that's important is extended lineages. These common ancestors that these people would form clans, and these clans tended to trace back to some great ancestor. How did kinship help identify an individual's place in his or her society? It helps determine how property was inherited. Does it go down through the mother or through the father? Clans gave people a sense of community and shared responsibility. And also you had age grades, where as you got older and grew and matured, then the responsibilities you had increased, but so did your privileges. And that's not all that different than in this country too. When you turn 16, you can get your driver's license. When you turn 18, you can vote. But that also comes with responsibilities as well. So that's not that different. If we look at political patterns, there's all kinds of political patterns that take place in Africa. And again, it's because there's so much diversity. So that's the key thing. Do you have to know any single one? No. But what you see is there tends to be more power sharing. Villages have consensus where they have open discussions and they debate, and then they come to some kind of general agreement. And even those that have kings, you tend to have villages that are ruled by chiefs who kind of take care of all the small details. And there is also limited power of kings in that these areas are just too diverse, too spread out. There's too many limitations to trade and transportation. And so a lot of that power has to get passed on to someone else. So you don't get these kings that are absolute power. It gets more spread out. And that's what the power sharing is about. So if we look at these smaller African societies, consensus decision making, and kings had to rely on chiefs to help them. Religious beliefs, again, many different religious beliefs. I mean, we've talked about Islam, we've talked about Christianity, we've talked about Judaism. Even Ethiopian Christianity is unique and different. You've got polytheism, you've got animism, you've got, I mean, there's just a tremendous amount of different types of beliefs. So it's really hard to kind of narrow it down. When we look at traditions in art and literature, creative arts, they tend to be closely tied to religion. So whatever arts they're doing has some kind of usually religious purpose. When we look at literature, some of these cultures did have writing, but others that didn't had griots. These are these professional storytellers. So a bit like Homer in ancient Greece, where he passed on the Iliad or the Odyssey. That's what griots did. They kept alive history and the meaning of the group of people. So the religious beliefs in African societies preserve very diverse set of beliefs: polytheism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, through written and oral histories. Griots preserved a lot of these ancient stories, histories, folk tales that got passed down from generation to generation to generation.